Welcome back to a new episode of the 1982 Kawasaki 750 Limited Rebuild. Now, this is the first project. As you know, I bought a 1981 750 Limited that I'm working on as a second new project. This is the previous one. And I've been doing a lot of work over the past weeks to get this bike running nice. And that's been a very steep learning curve because this is my first motorcycle project that I did by myself with a little bit of help of a few friends, of course. And it's been giving me some issues. And as you know, I've been running through the carbs and trying to adjust them, rejetting them. And that hasn't really solved the problem that I've been having with this bike. It's running very rough. And because I found out that it was giving quite a weak spark, I exchanged a few items in the electrical system with the 1981 750 Limited version that I have lying around. So for example, the IC unit and the pickup coils and the ignition coils, I switched them out with the 81 version, which helped a lot. It gave a much nicer spark. Other spark plugs, the wiring has also been replaced. So from an ignition point of view, I think we're all okay now. Of course, it is going to give me an issue on the new build that is upcoming, so I'll have to work through that also. I did buy two new ignition coils, or new, they're second hand. And from an electrical point of view, I think we're running okay now. And the carburetor hasn't been helping me at all in adjusting this engine. So last weekend I asked my friend Ted to give the bike a compression test, which we did. And we found out that cylinder number 1, 2 and 4 were giving a constant and consistent 118 psi, which is fine. And also they were holding the air, so there was no main leakage in cylinder 1, 2 or 4. And cylinder 3 was giving 60 psi. So that's about half of the other cylinders. And that's the primary reason why this bike was running rough. And actually we put back air into the system at 120 psi to find out where the leak is coming from. It's not coming from the exhaust and other parts of the engine. And we figured out very specifically that it was coming from the intake valve on cylinder number 3. So when we pressed air into cylinder 3, you could really hear it coming out of the intake valve of that same cylinder. So there's something wrong with the intake valve. And that means we have to pull the engine, because keeping the engine in the frame to take off the valve head is impossible. So my solely purpose built table to pull the engine is put back in place, as you can see here. And I've already taken off the tank and the seat. I'm now going to take off the ignition coils and the carbs, of course, and the primary chain, and a lot of the wiring I'll be taking off this evening. And of course the exhaust has to come off and the headers. So I have a few things that I have to take off that bike, so I'm going to get started now. It's about roughly 20 past 8 in the evening. It's already getting dark early. And yeah, when you work Monday through Friday, the only time you have left is either in the evening or in the weekend. So I'm just going to start preparing to pull the engine tomorrow evening and then take off the head. So I'll go through all those issues again with you. And coming weekend I'll take the valve head over to Ted, which I'll be filming. And we're going to check the valves and see what's wrong with intake valve number 3, cylinder number 3. So let me get started, go through step by step with you, and hope it runs smoothly. Right, well the first thing I want to do is take off the ignition coils, which are actually hanging here. The right ignition coil, and of course a left ignition coil. Take them off the bike first. And just to make it easier for me putting it all back together again, I'm going to use some masking tape and just number the cylinders so that I don't have to think about it when putting everything back in place. And especially the wiring up here, You know, I don't know everything by heart, and I don't want to look everything up in the manual every time. So just make some more efficient use of my time. I'll be also masking the wiring, just to make it easier when putting everything back in place, so it's a no thought process. So let me start doing that first. Well guys, maybe you think I'm exaggerating on doing this, but for me it's a no-brainer putting everything back together. So there's nothing I really have to think hard about when putting it back together. It all makes sense to me, and that's the most important thing. It's not a routine job for me. This is only the second time I'm going to pull the engine, and I just wanted to make it as easy as possible for myself to put it back in again. Now the wiring that goes into the ignition coils on this side here can easily be pulled off carefully. And this is wiring that you also might want to check to see if the connections are all clean. That's very important, so I'll be checking that a little bit later also before putting everything back in again. So taking off the wiring, we can keep the spark plug wires on the ignition coil, so we're not going to be taking those off. It's not necessary. Just unplug them like this. It's all straightforward, as you know, but I thought I'd just let you know every step while getting my way on pulling the engine. So let me take off the ignition coils and then we go to the carbs. Just to show you that the ignition coil, I'll just take it off completely, including the bracket. That's the easiest way. And as you can see, the right ignition coil connects cylinder 1 and cylinder 4. So the left ignition coil, which is still on the bike, connects cylinder 2 and cylinder 3. So let's take that one off right now. Before I forget, don't forget to disconnect your battery first, which is logical. And all the bolts and the nuts I'm keeping on this tray so I don't lose anything. The 2 coils have been taken off, so I'm going to place them underneath the table here so nothing will happen to them, and continue with the carbs. Well, the carbs, as you all know, there's nothing new I'm telling you here, are being held on to the carb boots, 4 of them of course, so I'm going to be unscrewing those, and when they're loose I can pull off the whole set of carbs, after of course I've first taken off the air filters. Now before actually pulling the carbs off, I would suggest that you first drain the gas that's still left in the carbs. It's easier to handle the carbs and you won't get any gas leakage when they're lying on the ground or in a box. So we'll just open all 4 of them here with the screw that you see on the side of the carb. There are 4 of those. Drain the gasoline out of the carbs and then we'll pull the carbs. Well, as you can see here, I'm making it easy on myself. Hooked up a small piece of hose, and now we're actually draining the carbs. Loosen the screw and now it's draining the gas into the tank. That's all there's to it. Right, well, we drained the carb bowls, of course, and just a little tip for you: after you unscrewed the drain screw at the bottom and drained out all the gas out of the carb bowl, just screw it back in tightly again, because that's something that you're easily going to be forgetting once putting the bike back together. And well, now it's just a matter of taking off the carbs. There we go. So now it's only a matter of taking off the throttle cable, which I'll show you in more detail. Here we go. Well, as you can see here is where the throttle cable comes into the carbs. So that's quite an easy one to do. Let me see if I can fix the camera in a better position and I can show you how I take off the throttle cable. Well, as you can see, we have the carbs here. So let me just pick up the throttle by hand, turn it up like this, and you can just easily pull it out at the bottom and it lets go. So now we can loosen the adjusting nuts here and actually take off the throttle cable. Very easy to do. Well, it's as easy as that. That's how we take off the carbs. And see what we're left with here. Now I want to fill up these intake holes with pieces of clean cloth just to make sure that nothing gets in there as a precautionary measure. So let me do that first. And then we'll start taking off some wiring in the primary chain. And of course the exhaust and the bracket. And taking out the engine bolts. I'll do that tomorrow evening. And then we'll just pull the engine. It's as easy as that. So let's continue. Well, like I mentioned, filled up the intakes with 4 pieces of cloth. So keeping of course all the bolts and nuts and brackets together. And put away the carbs now and start on the next bit of work. Right, the next step is taking off the exhaust. And the muffler's being held on by one single bracket, as you can see here. I'm not going to explain that in detail, that's easy. After I've taken off the muffler, I'll of course take off the headers from the engine. Here we go. Okay, well, where are we now? Let's have a look. As mentioned, I've taken off the muffler. Here it is. And the headers. The carbs, of course, the ignition coils. As you can see here, it's all been taken off. I've taken out the exhaust gaskets also, of course. Put all the parts in a tray so I don't forget anything when putting it back together. And it's now 9:20 in the evening. So this little bit of work, taking my time and filming it for you, took me exactly 1 hour. So what I'll do now is take off, of course, the RPM cable that needs to be taken off, and see if I can start taking off some electrical stuff, electrical wiring. And tomorrow I'll take off the link in the primary chain. Take off the chain, and tomorrow evening I'll take out the engine bolts and pull out the engine. So this was part 1. So I'm just going to be taking off some wiring this evening and the RPM cable, stuff like that. So there's no wiring left on the engine, and tomorrow I'll finish it and I'll also film it for you. And there you have it then. For me, a second time engine withdrawal. See you tomorrow evening. Well, just before I call it a night, let me just tell you that of course I will be needing to take off the clutch cable, which is a little bit of work. And besides that, of course, the wiring for the pickup coils on this side of the engine. And as I mentioned previously, the RPM cable, there it is, sitting in the front of the engine, has to be taken off. And I'll have to take off this right mounting, or sorry, protection bracket. And of course the brake pedal has to be taken off, and also the footrest, as you can see, because the engine is going to be coming out on this side. So I'm going to be pulling it out on the right hand side. That's the only way to pull out this engine. And besides that, yeah, tomorrow I'll take off the chain and the engine bolts and mounts, and then we'll pull the engine. So again, I say good night to you, and I'll see you tomorrow.